Some of the most interesting discoveries that archaeologists ever make are the ones they can't explain. They consult their textbooks, speak to their colleagues, and refer their finds for further advice from the world's most knowledgeable minds. But they still don't get the answers they seek. That's because they sometimes find things that defy all attempts to explain them. This video is about those troubling discoveries and features some of the most mysterious finds in history. Genglots are creepy creatures, even if you don't believe them, and far creepier if you do. According to legend and folklore, they can be found in the jungles of Indonesia and take the form of small humanoid dolls. Numerous artifacts have been presented as Genglot bodies in recent years, most of which can easily be written off as obvious frauds and hoaxes. But there are one or two which merit further investigation. It's said that Genglots survive by drinking blood, which makes them comparable to vampires, although they're apparently indifferent to whether the blood they crave comes from humans or animals. Some even say that they retain their thirst after death, so should be kept somewhere close to a supply of blood to ensure they don't feed on yours, although it would surely be a better idea not to have them in your house at all. We're not saying that the hard-to-explain creatures we see here are all Genglots, but even if they're not, some of them appear to be unknown animal species that ought to be studied more closely. Virtually all of the dinosaurs were wiped out when an asteroid collided with the Earth millions of years ago. But there are still species living in the world today that can be traced all the way back to the dinosaurs. Birds are one of them. And this newly discovered pigeon-shaped dinosaur with bat-like wings might be their oldest known ancestor. The discovery of the new dinosaur was announced in China in 2015, but was almost immediately challenged by experts from other parts of the world. The dinosaur has been named Yi Kui, which roughly translates from Mandarin into English as strange wing. That's a reference to the fact that its wings are made from membrane rather than feathers, which probably means the Yi Kui's capacity to fly was limited to short journeys. As the species was identified from one single 160 million year old fossil, which was missing everything below its ribcage, it falls short of the minimum standards to identify a new species in various parts of the world. And so the existence and uniqueness of the Yi Kui are not universally recognized. Hopefully, another one will eventually be found. Much of South America's history was destroyed when Spanish conquerors arrived in the 16th century. Because of that, we'll probably never know who built some of the continent's most incredible monuments. That includes the site of the Huaca Pucllana in Lima, Peru. This enormous stone complex was probably the urban center of a whole civilization. But we have no idea who that civilization was, where they went, or why they went to such trouble to build it out of clay and adobe some 1,500 years ago. The pyramid is said to have been built by the Lima culture, but all that means in real terms is that it was built by unidentified people who lived in Lima a long time ago. There are numerous rooms and spaces within the pyramid which may have been used for official meetings, and the western half might have been given over to religious use. But those are just educated guesses from historians. More recently, we found out that the Wari culture began burying their dead at the site from the 8th century onward. A tomb was found on the grounds of the Huaca Pucllana in 2008 and found to contain the remains of 3 masked people. That strange burial practice is one more mystery to add to the long list that exists at this site. Speaking of pyramids, some people believe that one was found among the frozen wastes of Antarctica in 2016. They claim that the pyramid can be seen so clearly that it's visible on Google Earth, and the distinctive shape of the structure is too perfect to have been shaped by nature. They argue that it must have been built by human hands. That would be a real problem for the established narrative of history if it could be proven to be true, because it would have to be over 100 million years old. Back then, Antarctica was a lush rainforest that would have provided a perfect cradle for life. Geologists are keen to point out that shapes like this are known as nunataks, which are pieces of rock that protrude above glaciers or sheets of ice. But that explanation hasn't satisfied conspiracy theorists. They say that no nunatak on Earth looks like this one, and that someone needs to travel to Antarctica to investigate the possibility that it's an ancient monument from a forgotten prehistory. We think that's incredibly unlikely, but then again, it genuinely does look a lot like an Egyptian-style pyramid. Surely it wouldn't hurt anybody to go look. When we use the phrase Sunstones in connection with Scandinavia, we're usually talking about the pieces of glass Vikings used to navigate the high seas. There's another kind of sunstone to be found in Denmark, though. These small, delicately carved stones, which were found on the Danish island of Bornholm in 2017, were created 5,000 years ago by people living in the Stone Age. Around 300 of them have been found thus far. They're called sunstones because of the lined patterns on them, which radiate out from a circle at their center. Many of them are circular, but square examples have also been found. In some cases, the pattern looks more like a spider web than a sun. All of the stones are extremely worn and weathered, which has led some experts to believe that they might have been carried around as good luck charms. But that's impossible to say for sure. In truth, we have no idea what their purpose might have been. The way that they've all been found clustered together suggests that they were buried on purpose, and a few of them show signs of having been burned. But their purpose eludes us. Perhaps it always will. Speaking of prehistoric messages carved under rock by our ancient ancestors, what are we to make of the ancient rock carvings at Argyll, Scotland? They're among the largest ring-shaped rock markings ever found in Europe, some of them measuring 2 feet across the center. The ring marks are deep depressions in the rock, which must have taken a lot of time and effort to create. Every now and then, the series of rings is broken up by a horseshoe shape. Scientists believe the marks, collectively known as the Aknabreck Cup and ring rocks, were created about 5,000 years ago. That's 2,000 years earlier than the founding of the settlement of Skara Brae in Orkney, one of Scotland's most famous early population centers. While markings of this kind are frequently found close to burial sites, the Aknabreck markings are not, or at least not close to any burial site that archaeologists have been able to find. They also appear to have gutters carved into them to allow for the passage of water over the rock. Again, the significance of this is unknown. Early humans made ring marks almost everywhere they went in the ancient world, and we have absolutely no idea why. If you want to try your hand at solving a 600-year-old Danish mystery, we've got the perfect one for you. King Valdemar IV of Denmark was laid to rest in the year 1375 at Vordingborg, his royal castle. He'd specifically asked to be buried there. 2 years later, his daughter, Queen Margaret I, had him exhumed and moved his remains to a small abbey in Sorrow. This seems like a disrespectful thing to do to a great king who'd managed to unite Denmark as one country during his reign, and historians have no idea why it happened. There are some suggestions that Margaret wanted to have her father buried next to her mother at Sorrow, but her mother's remains were buried elsewhere at Esrum Monastery and were never moved. She's still there today. Another theory is that Margaret wanted to downgrade the importance of Vordingborg Castle because it had become a significant target for Denmark's enemies. But the castle remained in constant use after the king's remains were removed and is still viewed with reverence today. Did the queen intensely dislike her father? Or was there another reason for the move that's been lost to history? The tomb known as KV 55 in Egypt's Valley of the Kings was first discovered in 1907. But we're not much closer to solving its mysteries now than we were more than 100 years ago. The tomb contained one body, the identity of which has never been determined, and a series of artifacts that appear to belong to different people. The leading candidates for ownership of the tomb are probably King Smetkare or Queen Tai, but there isn't enough evidence to be certain about either possibility. The 4 Canopic jars inside the tomb were all found to be empty, save for effigies of 4 different women. A gilded wooden shrine in the tomb is dedicated to Queen Tai, but 2 clay bricks elsewhere contain the name of Akhenaten. Marks on the casket mention yet another female, Queen Kaya. Forensic analysis of the human remains, though, confirmed that the body in the casket was of a male, and probably a male related to Tutankhamun. That's where the connection to Smenkhare comes from, as the king was Akhenaten's heir and Tutankhamun's brother. The whole tomb appears to have been made with haste, but the muddled mess of artifacts inside it suggests it was sealed in haste too. There are many fascinating sights to see if you ever take a trip to Pompeii in Italy, but there's a special attraction there if you're a fan of word puzzles. This is Sator Square, an ancient word puzzle that some people believe has magical properties. It was found at Pompeii close to the end of the 19th century, and to the best of anybody's knowledge, it's never been solved. The lettering on the square is palindromic and features the word tenet across its middle row. While the Sator Square in Pompeii is one of the oldest ever found at almost 2,000 years, the practice of making them is thought to be even older. Experts can't agree on whether the idea was conceived by the ancient Jews, Christians, or pagans. Some historians say that the Sator Squares were used as protection against evil spirits and were designed to be read or possibly chanted in a certain way, but such claims lack evidence. Taken together, the Latin phrase Sator arepo tenet opera rotas, as it appears on the square, roughly translates as, "The farmer Arepo works his wheels." But the phrase is meaningless without context. What's the real meaning of this monument, and why was it reproduced so often across the Roman Empire in the years that followed? Pyramids frequently appear across the ancient world, but not all of them are researched and investigated as thoroughly as those in Egypt have been. There are 13 pyramid tombs in Algeria, for example, and barely any research has been conducted into their origins at all. The tombs can be found close to the city of Tiaret and were built between 1700 and 1300 years ago. It's been posited that they might contain the remains of Berber royals, but that's an unproven claim at the moment. They've been overlooked by history to such an extent that they're not even currently designated as UNESCO World Heritage Sites. The tombs, known as Jeddars, were built during a time when what's now Algeria was divided into a series of tiny fiefdoms, each ruled by a Berber king. These are Algeria's Dark Ages, so very little is known about the history of the country during these centuries. Whoever the Berber kings were, they left very little behind for us to remember them by. To make matters worse, it's thought that the tombs were entered during the French colonial period and artifacts within them were taken away. But all records of this have since been either lost or destroyed. That might make these mysteries unsolvable. Carin de Gavrinas in Larmor-Borden, France, was built right at the end of the era of Neolithic cairn building and art, and it appears that the people behind it saved their best until last. Back when it was built, some 5,500 years ago, Gavrinas Island was still part of the French mainland. Time and tide have separated it since then, but the cairn is still standing. It didn't totally survive unscathed, though. The mound is semi-collapsed close to its entrance, with large stones partially blocking it. This explains why it wasn't excavated or explored until 1835. Even then, it wasn't until the 1930s that archaeologists finally realized it's a passage grave, with side chambers positioned around a central chamber topped with a colossal 17-ton ceiling slab. How that slab was moved into position 5,500 years ago is beyond our comprehension. The interior of the cairn is covered in zigzags, spirals, circles, and herring-gnome shapes, along with a few humanoid figures and depictions of animals, including what appears to be a sperm whale. This is highly irregular for the interior of a passage grave, and the purpose of the markings has never been determined. The people of Ethiopia are very proud of the obelisk of Axum, which stands in the city it's named for. They have every right to be, considering the fact it took 70 years for them to persuade the city of Rome to hand the enormous stele back to them. We can see why it took so long, though. the sheer size of the stele makes the fact that the whole thing is moved between continents and across seas twice within a century utterly incredible. The stele is a relic of the kingdom of Axum, which was a global superpower that lasted from 400 BCE until the 10th century and sat at the heart of a trade route between Rome and Persia. For most of that time, it was a pagan nation and erected huge pillars in honor of its leaders when they passed away. This ended during the 4th century, when Axum turned to Christianity. It's believed that the obelisk of Axum was built shortly before this time. It remained standing until the 16th century, when it was felled by an earthquake and left to sink into the sand. By the time Italian soldiers found the broken pieces of it during their conquest of Ethiopia in 1935, it had been forgotten about. They took it back to Rome with them and reassembled it as a symbol of their victory. But the United Nations ordered them to hand it back after the Second World War. It took them until 2007 to comply. Better late than never. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, and you will be the first to know when a new video comes out. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.